All right. Well, last but definitely not least, no stranger to the Business Radio X mic, we have Jane Goldner, PhD, President and CEO of the Goldner Group, and she's here to talk about her book, You Can Have Your All. And you guys can't see it, but on the cover, the word "it" is crossed out and replaced by "your," which I think is very cool.
Thank you for pointing that out.
No problem whatsoever. Well, welcome back to the show. I know you've been on before on Growth Matters with Michelle Matthews, but just tell our listeners that didn't listen to that show a little bit about your background and yourself.
I actually came out of corporate America and formed my own consulting firm lots and lots of years ago. And for the first 25 years of my firm, we were working with senior leaders and helping them with their leadership style to make major change and transition in their companies, all sizes, all industries. And a couple of years ago, I just decided to pursue my passion, and that is helping women in leadership, emerging women leaders who want to figure out their all. I got tired of the discussion because there's been so much about whether women can or can't have it all, as though there's some universal it all for all women.
Yeah.
And if I can borrow your term about high velocity.
Definitely.
For some women, their high velocity is leaning in. For some, it's leaning back. And for some, it's leaning out.
Well, I love that, too, because you're really breaking it out, and there isn't one answer for everyone. And I had my stepmom and my mom growing up both started their own businesses, and I had to watch them struggle and fight through all that to do that. So I think what you're doing is great. And so tell me a little bit about your book, Women Driven to Success, You Can Have Your All.
It's a combination of how did we become everything to everybody? And if you think back in time, we started as gatherers, and then we had some trailblazers, Joan of Arc, Betsy Ross, Charlotte Ray, who was actually the first African-American female attorney in the late 1800s, which most people don't know. And fast forward to World War II, and we had Rosie the Riveter telling us, we can do it.
Yeah.
And so we went to shipyards and munitions plants, and we did it.
Yeah.
But then the men came home from war, and we were sent home. And then we had our current trailblazers that we all know. So you fast forward to today, and we're actually doing dishes and diapers and million-dollar deals.
Yeah.
And we've become everything to everybody.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's okay. So the first part of the book talks about how did we get there, that it's not okay to be everything to everybody, and how do we figure out our all. The second part of the book actually walks you through in workbook style. How do you figure out your all, and then how do you move through the 6 essentials to get it?
Definitely. I love that. Well, you're definitely breaking down gender roles, which I absolutely think is really important. I mean, having a guy changing diapers and staying at home with the kid is definitely not a bad thing, and I'm seeing that more and more nowadays. And having the wife making all the money and owning the company and being the CEO, those are becoming more norms, which I'm liking. But there's still a lot of bad things in the industry. It's still hard for women, isn't it?
It is still hard for women, but I interviewed 14 successful senior-level women, and I asked them, tell me about your family. Tell me about what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And in fact, there's one woman who has this phenomenal corporate career, and she's supported by a stay-at-home husband who takes care of the 3 kids. Some are in traditional marriages, and some are in marriages where they share responsibility at home. I'm one of those women. I'm a baby boomer, so I started before this was really trendy.
Yeah.
I went back to work when each of my sons was 8 weeks old.
Okay.
And so my husband's a better cook than I am, so he cooks the dinners. He doesn't like to stand at the sink, so I wash the dishes. When my sons and my husband needed something ironed, they learned how to iron because I told them I wasn't born with an iron in my hand. And so we didn't have the traditional family, and we're seeing more and more of that. And it's like Sheryl Sandberg in her book Lean In said, the most significant decision you'll make, to your point, Candy, is who's your partner? Because that can really affect your all.
Definitely, and I like what you say there, the traditional family. What is that? Nowadays, it's like trying to put a square peg in a circle whole. And I like the point you point out that people need to play to their strengths. If you're a guy and you're good at cooking and you're good at ironing,
You can't even say it.
I can't even say it. No, I got that mental block there. If you're good at that, go ahead and do that. And everyone should play to their strengths and find a partner that really makes up for all your weaknesses, and that can solve a lot of problems.
Or is willing to compromise and not go along gender-specific roles.
Exactly.
And it's really been interesting, Kevin. I've heard from mainly millennial men, some young Gen Xers, who are saying, you wrote this book for women, but it applies to me. I don't want to do what my parents did. I don't want to work 80 hours a week and compromise my family life. And there's not a whole lot of discussion around, look, men were put in stereotypical roles. And I'm sure, or maybe you can identify with the fact that from very early on, you're supposed to be the primary breadwinner.
Yeah.
But there's no discussion about, okay, but then you had a trade-off, or older men had a trade-off of not being around their family and missing those sporting events and their kids and missing the parent-teacher discussions. So this also applies to them as well, and it's great to hear from young men. And I have a married son who has 2.5-year-old twins. He is very present in their lives.
Well, yeah, and I completely agree with you. I had to watch that growing up with one of my sets of family where the father was trying to be the breadwinner, and it put so much pressure and stress on him that, I mean, I didn't want that. I wanted an equal household. I wanted both people. If you have dual income, it's logical. If you have a strong dual income, you can do so much more. You can have more opportunities. You can travel more. You can do more for your kids. I mean, we really need to break down these traditional norms and go into things that are more they're logical. They make more sense.
And it's based around what the people want in their
Yeah.
lives. It's what's your all. And one of the women in my book, for example, was a high-powered partner in a large professional services firm. She was working 70 hours a week. She was traveling. And I just had lunch with her a few months ago, and she said, I have 2 young children. They're only going to be young once. I just negotiated with the senior partners to lean back, and she's working 35 hours a week.
That's huge.
This is what's important to her in her life, which brings up the point of, depending on which chapter you are in your life, your priorities change. And so you really need to sit back and think about what's important to me at this point, and how do I negotiate getting that.
Definitely. Well, let's dig a little deeper into the book. We've been talking around it, but how do you discover your all? Sort of break down the book and how it helps these people out.
Okay. The first and most important piece is to define your core. We're so used to thinking about a core for companies, for organizations. They have a mission, vision, set of values that they base all their decisions around. But what we don't think about is each of us need to have an individual core. What's our mission? What's our purpose, not just in work, but in life? So for me, it's to help other people learn as I continue my own learning. And that's true whether I'm talking to my husband, I'm talking to my sons, I'm talking to a coaching client or a corporate client.
Yeah.
And if I'm working my mission on all cylinders based on the driven to success, my vision then is what I could be at my best, what I would be happy if people said about me. And for me, it's that I'm a light that guides people down unforged paths, always showing them how much they can be. It's about potential. And then everybody has values that they say are important, but essentially you have 3 to 5 key values that backed against the wall you wouldn't compromise, not even for $1 million.
Yeah.
And for me, it's family, integrity, and health. And they've helped me make some really important decisions in my career. I worked for a Fortune 60 company. My division was sold. They offered me an opportunity to go into corporate, a great career opportunity. But my 2 sons were young, and I wasn't ready to give up all that time with them. So I said, thank you, but I'm going to start consulting, which gave me more flexibility to go to their sporting events,
Yeah.
to go to their teacher conferences. And integrity, I've had some clients ask me to operate in the gray area.
Wow.
And I've had to fire them because my ethical base, my integrity would not allow me to do what they're asking me to
Definitely.
do. And my last value of health is I wake up every day saying, I'm either going to choose to take time to be healthy or I'm going to have to take time to be sick. And I'd rather get up every day and jump on that treadmill or lift weights or do something that keeps me healthy than having to take that time to be sick. And so those 3 values really drive how I live my life. Now, the core for everybody, it's their North Star, it's their anchor. It stays constant through life. But your priorities around that core may change.
Definitely. Well, I love how you define the core, but it's really just telling people in a very intriguing, engaging way, hey, you need to understand yourself, find your potential, and then you can start building upon it. Because, like me, I have no artistic talents, but if I say, hey, I want to be the top graphic designer in the world, well, that's really unrealistic for me, even though I might really like that lifestyle.
Well, yeah, it depends upon your own gifts and your talents and your passion. But the thing about the core is it helps you make decisions between yeses and nos. And nobody has it all.
Yeah.
It's always about choices and trade-offs. So you're making choices about what's important to you, and at some point you have to say no to things.
Wow. So what's next? Are you going to be writing more books? Are you thinking about writing a man's companion to this one and teaching people, maybe having like a class for men and women to sort of partner up and see the other side? Or what's next for you?
Well, it's interesting. I've actually been talking with my son, who's a millennial, and I'm a boomer. And so we've been talking about really doing some work together. And maybe we do need to write a book for millennial men. He's
Definitely.
also an author. And so we've talked about that. But essentially, the rest of this book walks people through the 6 essentials to get your all, which are really important things that you need in your toolkit. So I think I've really created a workbook, a tool for people to do that. And I want to really get the word out about the book, about the coaching one-on-one that I do. I do a lot of speaking in corporations and in women's associations. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not quite ready to write my next book. It took me, my first book was published in 2009, and it took me to 2013 to get this one out. So
just want to make sure it's perfect.
No, we're trying to move away from perfection, which has been the bane of my existence.
Definitely. So you mentioned your son earlier. You mentioned millennials. Something that's really important to millennials is work-life balance. You talk about that in your book at all? Or?
Absolutely. And I want us to get rid of the term work-life balance.
Okay.
It is unrealistic. It's about as achievable as world peace.
I love that.
And so what happens is we think of the scale of justice and that our life ought to be balanced between work and not work every day. And when we don't get it, it affects our self-esteem.
Definitely.
We say, what are we doing wrong? We should have a balanced life. And it's really about, and this is a term that I've coined called role integration. And
Okay.
I'm a role integration coach. Because work is a role you play in life, albeit a big one. But why do we separate that out? It's one of the roles we play.
Definitely.
So how do we take all these roles and sort of like a tapestry, weave them together so over time we have our all? Not every
that.
day. We need to reframe over time we can have our all, not every day.
Perfect. Well, can you before we wrap up here, can you leave our listeners with maybe a word of advice and how they can reach out and contact you?
They can go to our website, www.thegoldner, Goldner, group.com. I'm on Twitter, The Goldner Group. I have a blog, and everything can be found on the website. And 404-459-2860 is the office number.
In the Goldner Group, you're still doing consulting, correct? Or
Mainly doing one-on-one coaching and
Okay.
speaking, and the consulting piece is helping corporations kickstart and continue leadership for women. And the book is available on Amazon.
And it'd be beneficial for a corporation to reach out to you. And can you just talk a little bit about what you talk with and how you help those corporations out when you come in and talk to them?
When I come in and talk, sometimes it's to the women's affinity groups
Okay.
that they've formed.
Perfect.
And actually, I just spoke at a major corporation, and it was the women's leadership development group and their bosses, who are mainly men.
That's perfect.
And I watched their eyes open up because the men aren't always aware of the barriers that women face.
That's a huge point you bring out. They're not aware of it. They're not trying to ignore it or put them down, but they just don't know.
Yeah, and there are a lot of unseen, under the waterline things that go on in companies that keep women from moving, particularly into senior levels and on boards. And so we will morph into including men in our work as well,
Well,
because we need to make work work for everybody.
Well, that's huge too. And with you coming in and sort of educating everyone about this, it's really helping the company out. And the return on the investment for the company is huge. Because getting these women and stuff on board, you're getting people that are super qualified that are being overlooked that can really help advance the company.
Exactly, Kevin. It's exactly right, because I believe there's a statistic that says that 20% of the employable population has 60% of the needed skills.
Wow.
So all these companies are going after that 20%, and there needs to be more women in the pipeline for leadership because they're extremely talented women, as you said, being overlooked.
And they can multitask, which we can't do.
To a great degree, yes.
All right, we'll give that contact information one more time, and thank you so much for being on.
It's www.thegoldnergroup.com, 404-459-2860. The book, as well as the ebook, is on Amazon.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming on today.
You're welcome.
Kevin, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. This is Kevin Finn for all our guests today and everyone here at the Business Radio X family saying we'll see you next time on High Velocity Radio.